Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me today is my Emerging Civil War co-founder, Kris White, the Senior Education Manager of the American Battlefield Trust. Kris, hello. How you doing?
Very good. How is my second wife doing right now?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Thank
Good.
you. And also joining us is the man, the myth, the cartography legend, Steve Stanley, coming to us from the hangar where the Millennium Falcon was parked just moments ago, and I see it zooming off behind you there. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How you doing, Chris? Nice to see another Chris too. I rarely get to see him.
Yeah, we talk a lot by email, but never get to see each other.
Right, it's true.
And I would go so far as to say that Steve's work is among the most iconic, recognized work in the entire Civil War community, because he is the mastermind behind the maps that people get from the American Battlefield Trust. And people love those maps. Steve, really, I'm not exaggerating. I think that those are just so iconic, a fantastic work.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoy doing them too and putting them out there.
So we're talking with Kris and Steve today because they have collaborated on Volume 2 of Battle Maps of the Civil War. And Kris will show this off here in a little fancier way than my screen share will do. But they've got a new map book from the Trust of Civil War maps, battlefield maps of the Civil War of the Western Theater. There we go. And this features Steve's maps and Kris's text. And let me just ask each of you, what was it like for you guys to work on this book together? And Steve, maybe I can have you start first.
It was enjoyable. It was really pulling up all the stuff that we've been doing over the years and adding a few new maps to it. But it was nice working with Kris and also John and the Trust as well. So the three of us working together was fantastic, and I enjoyed it. See,
Kris, some people like working with me and writing with me.
It's an acquired taste, right?
Yeah, very much. No, Steve brings up a good point. We do have a third silent partner, John Mitchell, who is our internal GIS guy at the Trust. So we technically have two map guys, as we call them. Steve is more of the front facing, and John does a lot of our internal map work. He does the reviews of Steve's maps, helps to plot the lands that we've saved or we're thinking about saving, trying to preserve, gets those over to Steve. Steve is going to update our maps. And then John does a lot of our internal real estate maps. They're the maps that are not front facing because, believe me, they're not worth looking at to the general public. They're just very ugly looking maps. And what Steve does is take those very ugly maps and makes them look very, very pretty and brings the history and the kind of the modern flair to life.
Yeah. Steve, you have amassed a pretty incredible body of work creating these maps for the Trust for so long. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how you first got involved in this cartography?
Yeah, it started back in the mid 1990s. I was working with. I met some people with the Central Virginia Battlefield Trust, and I was a graphic designer at the time, and I started talking to them. I wanted to contribute my way, in any way, just other than just giving them money. I wanted to, give them something back. So I started doing free graphics work for them. Dealing with that, we worked with the National Park Service because we were closely with the National Park Service in Fredericksburg. And so one day, Bob Crick came to me and said, hey, we're doing this map series. Would you like to work on Spotsylvania Courthouse? Instead of,
that's got to be like the Godfather coming to you and saying, having Bob.
That's true. That is true. It was an honor to work with him. I actually worked with Frank O'Reilly with those, but Bob's the one that started the ball rolling. So my first one foray was 25 large scale maps of the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. So that started the ball rolling, and here and there started working for Richmond, and then one day I met Melissa Sadler. Now I can't remember her maiden name was, but now Melissa from the Trust at an event, and I got invited to come to the Trust, and just show what I do, and then it went from there. I started doing work for the Trust, and I think our first map was Battle Across Keys.
And how long ago was that? I'm putting you on the spot.
I know. Probably 1998.
Now, if you had to spitball, how many maps do you think you have made since 1998?
Oh, I mean, making them, remaking them, or just all individual maps? Probably all individual maps since '98. Probably close to 500-600 of them. You know, my external hard drive is full of maps for the trust.
Because when you say remaking, like as they acquire new land and they have to highlight new properties, you've got to readjust things, right?
That too, and also as time goes along, things do get missed. You know, we're putting the histories, the troops in place, and well, you know, someone said, "Oh, you missed, you know, this regiment here," instead of pulling up, okay, we did miss it, or we didn't miss it. Sometimes, you know, they think we did, but sometimes we did miss something, so we'll readjust it and put it back out there again. So that happens quite a bit, you know. Of just, you know, just human error. We just, you know, everyone just misses minor little things. You're looking at the overall picture, not the minute details sometimes.
I've got to imagine that there are some people out there that collect those like baseball cards. So like, you know, when you get the one that's printed upside down and like, ooh, this one's a collector because it doesn't include that particular regiment, which they then updated. And,
I'm sure there are people who do that. Yes, I know there are people who do collect them quite a bit. The old editor of the Hollow Ground, Julie Fix, or Julie Donnie at the time, she used to hate, people would talk to her and say, "Oh yeah, I get the magazine, but I always rip out the maps and throw the rest of the magazine away." She used to hate when they said that to her.
Yeah, we were talking about when we just got on that a lot of people have their own binders of Steve Stanley maps, and they will call us at the trust if they didn't get a map or they've lost a map or they got water damage on it. And then it became so popular to have these 3-ring binders, we actually started supplying them through our online store at battlefields.org. And we thought, you know, some people would buy them. We sold out of them, and they also complained we didn't have front pockets in them, but for them to tuck things into. And so we've made changes and listened to them with that way. But yes, Steve has a cult following coming behind him, and it's funny that you mentioned that Cross Keys map. That is one of Jim Lighthizer first victories as president of the American Battlefield Trust. And he had on his wall up until just a few months ago when he retired, the newspaper clipping from the auction and going out there and helping to save that land. So, you know, one of Steve's first maps is one of Jim's first victories.
Oh, wow. And so to see the organization and the cartography evolve together, that's a pretty cool story.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you pull my map ups from back then and to now, you can see the evolution of how I've actually changed throughout the years too. You know, adjusting things. Oh, I don't like the way that looks now. You know, back then, so I adjust things, and you know, to just come to the point we have right now.
So, what would be some of those adjustments that you've made over time, Steve?
Different size of troops. You know, sometimes, you know, I would draw the thickness of the troop block, and then later on say it looks too thick now, too bulky on the page, so I'd adjust that, just thin it out, or actually going back, you know, later on and make them the right size. Actually trying to get them, you know, if this regiment has 300 in it, this regiment has 200, and make sure they're comparable in size too. You know, so little things like that, or just how an arrow looks. You know, and now I've been basically changing all the trees. You know, making them look not as bulky again too.
And those are significant changes. I know some people will be like, "Oh gosh, what's the big deal?" But like those maps do a lot of work, and I think about how much information you have to convey, and so you've really got to make it something that people can easily digest and process and move through. That is quite a challenge.
That is, and it is true. People always like the fact that they can see movement on my maps. You know, my maps do convey movement. And said that's why I'm making them streamlined as possible, so you can get more information in there. You know, myself personally, I like if I could do it every battle have more than just one map. Because sometimes we just can't do that. You know, because you really can't convey everything that's happening on one map. You can get a very good idea of everything that's happening, but you really can't convey all the little nuances in the battle.
Yeah, and that makes me think of one of the maps that Steve's done for the Wilderness, the Battle of the Wilderness, and the Saunders Field section. There's so much that happens on May 5th up there, and then into May 6th, trying to convey Union attack, the Confederate counterattacks, the extension of the Union lines and the Confederate lines. I mean, maps, what some people forget, and Kris and I have complained about this in the past, and we're not cartographers. What people forget is that a lot of times a map is just a snapshot of 1 second of a battle. So all you're seeing is a glimpse of the battle in some regards. Yes, the troop movements are moving forward, they're moving back, but like, oh, well, you don't have this person here or this here. Well, 15 minutes from now, they moved into a different position. But this snapshot that we're showing, that's where they are at the time. And I think that's what folks need to understand sometimes is like, and also read the legend, because, on a lot of our maps, Steve does it, it says it's this time, and this time. We have, a few different phases of battle. But, it's just, everyone's a critic.
I was going to ask you, Kris, as someone who's had to take battle information and try to translate it into a map form, what are some of the challenges for an author to try to translate that text into a map?
Well, Steve has a really good essay in both volumes of our book, kind of talking about the process of making a map. And, as a historian, we do a lot of what Steve does as a cartographer. And I pull the old maps to take a look at what it looked like at the time of the battle. And of course, compared it to today. The Salem Church battlefield is probably the best example of a lost battlefield and trying to figure out where to put people. In 1863, it's a wide open fields. And then today it's a 7-Eleven, two furniture stores, Taco Bell, anything else you can think of. So it's hard to visualize what it would look like. But then you have to really start reading the accounts of different things. And when you start getting into the accounts, they don't always agree with one another. You'll have one brigade commander say one thing and maybe a regimental commander say another. So as we're talking, I was working on some research last night trying to place a skirmish line on a different map for Gettysburg. And, okay, there are 4 companies of these skirmishers going out on the line. But where exactly did they do that? Was it at this point or that point? So it's really trying to almost be a historian itself, just to do this is trying to compare, contrast, and then see what everyone starts to say. And then if 90% of the people say it was like this, it's probably was that way. And every once in a while that 10%'s right. And we do find that out the hard way sometimes, but it really is doing a lot of research, a lot of reading, and then trying to compare and contrast what it looked like on the ground.
So then, Steve, you get a bunch of notes like this from a historian, and then you've got to try to visualize that. What happens next in the process for you?
Well, as I said, the essay is that my first thing to actually do is actually locate the battlefield. You have to put it on the map itself. Everyone knows where Gettysburg is, Antietam, but there's other battlefields out there. You really have a hard time pinpointing the exact location of that battle. So that's usually really the challenge right there. That's always the first thing I have to do. Then start pulling up other historical maps and modern maps, because my maps, you notice I actually have modern features in the background, just so we can help you can pinpoint yourself on that battlefield. So I'll pull up modern topography maps, historical ones, and then blend it together and make my base map, as accurate as possible. Then pull in the research from what Kris has done or any other historian, and I have contemporary work, I have modern, work. My library is full of stuff. Just to pull up and I'll start reading through. And my wife says she can tell when I'm busy. I have books all over my desk, back and forth, look at this book. He says here, okay, they're agreeing. So they're like Kris said, 90% of people, they agree that must be the right way. So that's what I do too. And follow all that back and forth to figure out where the troops are going to go.
There's a great story from John Badger Batchelder, who's the unofficial historian of Gettysburg. And he talks about in 1863, late 63, he goes to visit the Army of the Potomac, which is encamped around Culpeper Brandy Station area. And he meets with a brigade commander in the 2nd Corps, and he has 5 regiments in it, which is Edward Cross's old brigade. So he goes in there to talk with all the regimental commanders, and every one of them placed themselves differently on the line than the last person said. And he walked out of there just completely confused and very, flustered. And he's not a trained historian, nor was he a cartographer at the time. He does go on to make an inaccurate map of the Battle of Gettysburg. It's beautiful, but his heights are off by like 120 feet. But he does eventually make a map and everything, but he's going through those same pains talking to the primary sources, meaning the people themselves who couldn't even put themselves in the right place. So sometimes it's hard to place a regiment or to place even a feature on the ground, because you have to remember, a lot of the features have disappeared from time to time, or a feature is described 5 different ways by 10 different people.
And you mentioned there, sort of the heights are different. And Steve, I've got to imagine that kind of working 3-dimensionally and then translating that 2-dimensionally poses some interesting challenges as well.
Yeah, it does. That's one reason I use modern actually as close to historical topography lines as I can, but that helps give you an idea of where everybody was in height wise. You can tell where the cannons were up here because they're right behind the military crest, or they're on the military crest of the ridge or whatever it is. So yeah, and if you can read a topo map, you can actually tell how high they are compared to some. Not everyone can read a topo map, so it is a challenge there for those people.
Hey, Kris, I see you sort of nodding your head about the topo maps.
Yes, having worked at a National Park Service Visitor Center, I've learned that people can't read basic maps, and topo maps are like going to grad school for maps for them. I mean, you have to become comfortable, and there's some great non-Steve Stanley maps out there. The Trailhead Graphics have done for Gettysburg, Shiloh, Vicksburg, that locate monuments on battlefields and other features. But they are placed over topo maps. And if you're not comfortable with using a topo map, then it can be very tough. We actually made, because someone internally at the trust didn't want to admit that they didn't know how to read a map, so maybe we should make a video about how do we read a map. And so we made one, and there's one over on battlefields.org. But it very much is something that not everyone can read a map. And and a lot of people love to be oriented when you go out onto a battlefield. I'm not a person who needs to turn the map whichever way. I can see it. That's just kind of me channeling Ed bars. But with them, they can need to turn it a certain way. So everybody does learn differently, and everyone experiences things differently. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people out on the battlefields with either Steve's map or another map book or something, turning every which way, trying to read it properly and figure out where everything sits.
If I'm standing in this direction, looking in that direction, how's that orient to the map, and sort of twisting things around? And that can be difficult for some people to get oriented that way.
And that's why for myself, I do that on my maps. That's why I put modern features, modern roads on there, so they can help orientate themselves to that map. They could say, I'm standing on this road here. It wasn't there in the battle. It's a park road now or something, and so it helps them orientate, to figure out where they are and what was happening around them.
And I think that's got to be really important for the trust's preservation mission. When you're saying here's this piece of land and here's why it's so important to save, having those modern features can really help visualize and that impact, I think.
Yeah, we have a lot of maps that I know Steve's working on right now, a little project to show the evolution of our battlefields from when we started working on preserving battlefield land to what they look like today. And Perryville's a perfect example, the Perryville battlefield out in Kentucky, of a battlefield that was very small, at least in terms of land preserved, and now it's looks like a massive nature preserve because of the amount of space that has now been preserved by us, Friends of Perryville, and other groups out there. It's been great to see, and those features do help to show the impact. I know when we were preserving the slaughter pen farm, one of the best things that we could do was show just how close the GM plant was next to it, or some of the artist renditions that kind of supported the maps that Steve was putting together.
So we're talking about battle maps of the Civil War, the Western theater, although we haven't really talked about the book itself. So let's kind of talk about the book, and maybe even back up and talk about volume 1, which is the Eastern theater, which gets us to the Western theater, because you guys basically had to start from scratch and figure out how to put together a map book, and then suddenly start kind of creating this product from scratch. Kris, you want to kind of walk us through that lightning bolt when someone said, hey, we should do a map book? Well,
that idea has come across a few times, and the backstory behind it is kind of funny and kind of like, ugh. But we had a lot of members say, you should put your maps in a book. And for a while it was, do we want to put a book out there? Will it make money? Because we are a nonprofit, and the money from these go to battlefield preservation. So we use these with appeals for new pieces of land and other things that we're working on. And for a while, it just kind of simmered there. And then a whole committee of people got together and overthought the project. And then they finally decided, hey, we should talk to two people who actually wrote a book. And that was, Steve, myself, Gary Edelman came in a little bit later. And, we started walking them through the process. And like, oh, this isn't as bad as it seems. And we kind of streamlined the process and decided we're going to make a map book. From there, it was what maps should we do? What features should we take? And my idea was we should have a theme behind it, because that would be better than just putting all Steve's maps into a book. And then just put a little bit of context with each one of the maps. I have the easy job. All I have to do is put a few words on a piece of page. Steve does the heavy lifting and all the pretty work. And then it was, what battles to choose. And that was more difficult than you would imagine, because we are a land preservation organization. So do we show major battlefield lands where we may not have saved lands because it's important to the story? Or should we just show places where we preserved battlefields? And ultimately, we came up with a mixture, and it is largely places where we saved land, but it also breaks down to key moments of the Civil War that need to be talked about, even if we didn't preserve land there. So we mark that in the maps. I mean, one place we did not preserve any land is for the Battle of the Monitor and the Merrimack. So it's out it's out in Hampton Roads, and it's one of my favorite maps actually that we did. And it'll tell you on each page, did we save land here? How much did we actually save? So every time you go through, you can see where we preserve land. Fort Sumter's another example that shows up in the volume 2 of the book, because technically that's the Western theater by the end of the Civil War. And so we didn't preserve land there, but it is crucial to telling the story of the Civil War. So that's how they kind of went. And then it was, Steve says he has 600 maps. What maps do we use of those? What battlefield gets more maps and what doesn't? And that was probably the hardest decision for us to make internally.
And when you say like, well, what battle gets maps and what doesn't, and we all know that you could do like a battle maps of Gettysburg. There are people who would want super micro tactical play-by-play maps. So kind of sorting through all that content and curating it, I'm sure was a huge challenge.
It was, and making the decision again. We are a land-based preservation organization. Should we put a map in here from this place? And we also have to think about our partnerships. We have great partners out there who also help preserve land or who work with us when we do preserve land at it's different sites. So that was something else we had to take into consideration. So, we decided with the first two books, especially the Eastern and Western theaters, that we'll focus on the large battles, the key pivotal battles as they were, places like Gettysburg, Antietam, Vicksburg, Shiloh, those ones. And then as we go down the road, if the series continues to be successful, we'll go off to these, other off the beaten path as they were, some of the battlefields and take a look at those. But we also do preserve other battlefields. With Revolutionary War and War of 1812, we don't just do Civil War anymore. So those will be on the horizon as well.
So, Steve, you get a phone call. Hey, we want to do a map book. What goes through your head?
Well, first is fantastic. That's always I've been talking about that for years as well. Hearing back and forth from the members. Oh, we love the book, because every year during our annual conference, we have a map book basic for the conference itself. And people would say, "Oh, this is great. Can we get have one?" So I was really excited the first time we said, hey, "We're going to do a map book. This is great." I was, but then the process back and forth, and Kris said, "Oh, everybody wanted their little bit in there and all that stuff, and trying to come up with the right formula." And finally, we did. So I was really happy about that.
So were there maps then that you maybe have been thinking like, "Oh, I've always wanted the chance to go back and revisit this map or redo this, and now here's a chance for me to do that"?
Yes, there's quite a few of those. Just going through Antietam. I've reworked some Antietam maps. This is in the first book. Fredericksburg, again, I reworked some Fredericksburg maps. All types of them in there. way too many, trying to remember exactly which ones I did change, especially the first book is almost a year old now. And the second one we're talking about here, the Western Theater, there was a lot in there. I got to go back, and Shiloh was a big one. I went back and reworked everything, more detail, more time frames, because I was given the latitude to do that on some of those. Some we're still condensed them all in one map, and some I had latitude to go as many maps as possible.
Okay. So Kris, tell us, how did the first map book go over once it first came out?
Folks were happy, and before I answer that one, Steve also has the problem that not only does he finish a map and then we have to go back to him and say, hey, we have this really bad problem, we just saved a bunch of land here, which is a good problem.
Right.
But so Steve sometimes, up until we get ready, because Steve also does a layout for the books, which makes life a heck of a lot easier on both of us, I think. Steve actually sometimes has to change the maps up until print time. We have to tell our real estate department, and John Mitchell, who's our silent partner in this, he works with real estate. So he's always very good about telling us, hey, we're about to purchase land here. We purchased land. So that is one thing that is different than a traditional map book, that we're always have to update them. And that was also another fear of us doing a map book, is that we've saved almost 54,000 acres at this point. So by the time it goes to press, some of those maps are already out of date when it comes to preservation. So that was something to consider. But, the first map book went over very well. Our members were extremely excited to know that we were doing it. We designed it to actually be tear out maps, so that folks can actually tear out the map. There's 3 holes punched in it already for them to use their binders, because we knew that from their feedback, we do listen to our members, that's something that they liked. And you don't have to do that with your book, but it was about 112 pages, and almost all of it is maps. I mean, there's very little text, very few pictures. Of the 112 pages, you have like 8 maps of Gettysburg. There's 1 page of text for it to give you the background, and then so on and so forth. As Steve said, some of our battlefields, we'd love to put more maps in there but it really did come down internally to talk about, what story are we trying to tell? That's any book, and trying to kind of manage expectations, because like Steve said, with Shiloh, we've done so much work in Tennessee, and specifically at Shiloh, I mean, we could have a dozen maps out there or more if we wanted to about the stuff that we've done. But the members were very excited. We've sold, I think, nearly 9,000 copies of the first volume of the book. We just got some numbers back the other day, and it was so popular so quickly that we actually ran out of books by the time we even got it from the printer. So many people had pre-ordered it that we had to order a second batch. And at that point, we knew we were going to make a second book, because the caveat was, if the first book doesn't sell, we're not doing volumes 2 through 1,000. We're going to we're going to see how this works. And it was so successful so quickly that we produced another book in less than a year. And the next book that will come out will come in even sooner than that, because they're clamoring for it so much. And if you want to see that book in person, hopefully, fingers crossed with COVID, and hear Steve speak about that, that'll be at our annual conference this June in Chantilly, Virginia.
In fact, we're interrupting you from work on that book to talk about the other book right now.
Well, I mean, it's a good problem to have. We're very happy that our members like these maps. I went to put in for the new book yesterday. One of the process people don't understand about books is that you have to register at different places, including the Library of Congress. And I went out to pull biographies for me and Steve off the internet. And I mean, Steve's biography is, he's the iconic brand for the Civil War Trust and some other things. So it was an older one that I found. And I was like, wow, this was a third party writing Steve's biography for him, but they had nothing but great things to say about Steve and his maps. They were very gushing. And that was before we were the American Battlefield Trust and before this new book came out.
So, Steve, these are handsome books. Full-size maps, full color, glossy pages. As a guy who did the maps, did the layout, what's it like to kind of finally hold that finished product?
It's always exciting, because you got that. It's like your baby's right there in your hand, your new baby, with yourself, if you ever have a new book out, you really want, you want to hold it, you want to show everybody, oh, my book's out here, and people do that all the time. You see them on Facebook and all the authors I'm friends with, posting pictures of their brand new book they just finally got in. So, it's always exciting to see that. I don't get to see it for a little bit, the actual finished copy for, no, Kris gets a chance to send me copies down here because I'm not up in North anymore. So, and with COVID, he wasn't in the office all the time. So I always had to wait, a month or two to get my copies, but it's always exciting to see on my hand.
Terrible.
Steve saw the book 2 days after I did. So, because when I got my book, I had our intern FedEx it down to Steve because we probably didn't see the book for 3 weeks. We had members who had the books before we did because of COVID. Yeah. I saw the final proof. I signed off on all the final proofs. Once I sent it back to the printer, that was the last time I saw the book. And then all of a sudden people are like, hey, the book's out. And Steve and I are like, hey, we haven't seen the book yet. So, I was told I had a box of them sitting in my office, but I still haven't seen that box because I'm still sitting working from home. But I had one of our interns who actually went into the office, slipped in one day and sent them to me, Steve, and a few other people who worked on the book.
I got my copies. I was thrilled. I mean, it's such a beautiful book. And so it was just exciting to see. And Steve, I've got to imagine being as intimately involved with the actual creation. You've got a lot more creative control over the book than most people have. So to kind of see it fully realized as you were working on it must be pretty neat.
Yeah, it is, because obviously it's a visual thing we're looking at here in this book itself. So it's visually, on my screen, I know it's going to look like when it's done. It's still you still want to have it in your hands. But my other books I've worked with, other than the trust, I've always had was able to design them and everything, which is always never heard of from authors. But, usually the authors they send their copy in, publisher does everything, then you don't even know what the book even looks like till it comes back, till it's done. At least with me and like Kris got to see it, you get to see it evolution the whole time. Laying out the pages. This is too much text. It's not enough text, or the map's not fitting just right, or too many maps. So I get to see it all before it was done. So it was like, but still to hold it in your hand is fantastic.
We've been gushing about the maps, but I'm going to gush about the text for a second. And Kris is the author for all that. What I really loved about both of these books, the Eastern and the Western books, was that, you've got a map on the left or the right-hand page, you've got text about the map on the left-hand page. And so like it's a fantastic, succinct summation of this battle or that battle. And you get the whole overview of the war in one particular theater in a really digestible, easy to read, easy to understand synopsis. I just thought it was fantastic as a summary of the war.
I appreciate that. You've trained me well, Padawan. I guess I'm the Padawan, I should say. And Kris actually helped with the proofreading. But the hard part for me, and it kind of goes back to what I said about the maps being a snapshot. Sometimes we're telling in 500-ish words the entire Gettysburg campaign. And we try to do that in 4 minutes in a video. It's hard. So to do it in 500 to 550 words or less, it can be difficult, because what you're trying to do is not only talk about the battle, but set the context of, what the battle is within, here in 1863, for the summer of 1863, say for Gettysburg or Vicksburg, what's going on in these different various places. And that was a little bit challenging, because I believe Steve sent me back a few times too much text, and it's like, he's right. It's like, oh, now what babies do I kill in this? It's really a story, it's really a hard thing to come up with. Steve's maps do tell the story of the battles largely themselves. I mean, I'm a map person, so that it's probably easy for me to say. I can visualize a battle very easily coming off of a map. Not everyone can. So that's why we have the text there. And so it's nice to have it where we can tell the narrative flow of what happened from point A, B, and C. And then Steve's, visuals absolutely are the star. When I wrote the introduction of both the books, I mean it. The maps are the star of the book. My text is the easy part in most ways, because it's like he's got all the hard work to do. But it's I think it turned out well. I think we do tell a narrative arc through it, at least through both volumes. And hopefully we'll do that with our third volume as well.
So you guys kind of got one book under your belt when you did the Eastern book. How was it different to work on the Western book?
It was easier for me internally because now we had something to say, hey, look, we made it happen. We could do it again. And we told you we know what we're talking about. We got it, and that kind of made life a little easier. And believe me, they've given us a lot of leeway. David Duncan, our new president, who was the head of development at the time, he gave us a wide berth, and, he knew what we were doing, and go forth. And that was very nice. He knew we had the vision and we can execute it. And we proved it. So I think that made it easier. It didn't make it any easier choosing the maps. Especially out west with the amount of lands we've saved in places like Kentucky and Tennessee and Mississippi. I do think that was the hardest part, was narrowing down, again, where we have been prolific in land preservation, but where we have not been, but yet that's important to the overarching story.
Steve, how about you? How was working on the Western book different than working on the Eastern book?
Well, one thing I didn't have to hear, from Kris or John, how all the nuances, everybody, well, we want to do this, all the fighting back and forth for the first book. Because obviously we were settled in. So again, it was just like Kris said, it was picking out what maps we need, to fit into our format, and how many maps we wanted for each battle. So Kris would send me a list of battles. This is the battlefield we want to say we're going to put in the book. So I would go through and say, well, can we do this in 3 maps here? This is 2 maps, 1 map, throughout the whole process like that. So, and that's what we're doing for our next book too. We the same thing. It's easier. On my end, again, like Kris said, I wasn't there part of all the little fighting back and forth of what people wanted their input on the first book. So, for me, it was almost the same process.
What's something about the Western book that each of you like in particular?
I'll go first. I like my Shiloh maps. I think I really got some nice detail, I feel, in the Shiloh maps itself. So that was one of my favorite ones to work on.
Yeah.
I think it's Port Hudson. It's a fascinating, almost trans-Mississippi story that just slips inside of the Western theater, that I thought was very interesting. And I thought that we found our stride with book 2, and that kind of happens with series. And I thought that the narrative flow with this one, even though the first one I thought was good, I thought that the narrative flow, I was very, very happy with the way that went. And the maps overall, I mean, there are a few maps that we had Steve create out of the blue, including Spanish Fort and Fort Blakely down in Mobile. And Fort Blakely's a really cool site to go out to. And it's, the end of the Mobile campaign. Most people think of Damn the Torpedoes, and that's in the book too, which is actually a really cool map, which is Fort Gaines and Fort Morgan, and as well as, David Farragut. But the other end of the story, Mobile doesn't fall until basically April of 1865, and that action happened in August. So to have it fall, you have to have another battle that takes place up at Spanish Fort and Fort Blakely. And I thought those maps were probably the most challenging from my perspective to give to Steve, because I didn't have a lot of information to give him. I gave him the best maps that were out there, and they weren't that good. And there's not a lot of firsthand information, even though it is a siege. I don't know what you thought about that, Steve, but I thought they turned out well.
Yes, you are correct. They were very challenging to work on itself. Pulling, especially Fort Blakely and even Spanish Fort. Spanish Fort wasn't as bad as a Fort Blakely. That one, because I did Fort Blakely a while ago, but the detail wasn't that much. I was able to find more stuff and add more detail to that as much as possible, so we can really show the property we saved at Fort Blakely why it was important then too. So if you ever pulled up one of my old maps of Fort Blakely from the Trust Archives, and compared to the new one here, it's 180 on that, especially detail.
Now, the people can go online and still get a bunch of your maps for free. When you updated them for the book, did you put those updated maps online, or are people kind of stuck with the last version before the print?
No, we're always updating the maps online, is constantly. or when the book is that book was done, I go ahead and I upload all the maps to to our site itself, and then they get put onto the web. So like the new end of everyone, so all the new ones go there, so they get up on the web right away.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's a full-time job sometimes up whenever we have a project like this, because we created for the book, or Steve created 70 some odd maps. So even if the maps were up there, they needed to be updated.
Right.
So here's the Spanish fort and Fort Blakely map you were talking about. Chris, you want to kind of walk us through this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting battle that takes place just outside of Mobile Bay, and I know the map sideways on here, but it is one of the last actions to take place, and the major actions to take place in the Civil War. It's taking place in conjunction with the Appomattox campaign, the fall of Petersburg, the Appomattox campaign, and it's we're talking about a place that is today partially developed and partially a really cool state park down there. And what we gave Steve, I mean, you can see the lines here. The best we could come up with for the base map, at least for me to send over to him, came from the Atlas of the Civil War, and that was tough to read because it was even a small, very confusing looking map from that point. So I think that what Steve put together here worked out very, very well. And if I'll jump up to Fort Fisher is the other map that I thought was really cool that Steve did. We didn't save land at Fort Fisher. A good portion of it, as you can see, is in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean. And then part of the fort was made into a World War II airstrip. So, the preservation down there, well before the trust even existed, this was almost, wouldn't call it a fully lost battlefield, but it was a battlefield that was, being taken back by Mother Nature as well as the military. But it's a really awesome map to show what happened during the Second Battle of Fort Fisher. The first battle is a complete disaster with Ben Butler, so that's all you have to say is Ben Butler. But he tries to float a fire ship into the rebel works and have it explode, and then he's going to land troops, and then it doesn't work. The ship blows up too early. But the second advance on Fort Fisher is much more robust. It's put together with a great combined naval operation. It's the largest naval operation, joint operation between the Army, Navy for an amphibious landing from sea until you get into the First World War. So this is a really interesting battle. And Steve, I think, did a great job of not only building a map, but building a map on land that no longer exists.
For being a land preservation group to have some water maps is actually pretty cool. Chris, do you mind scrolling down the page just a little bit? Because one of the features I think is really cool about this book, notice here at the bottom of what's labeled as page 94, it says, to date, the American Battlefield Trust has not saved any land at Fort Fisher Battlefield. And I really like that feature about this book because A, it's just optimistic sounding. To date, we haven't, but there's always that opportunity. And B, it's like, as Chris mentioned earlier, like this is not a place where they have saved land, but it's so central to the story that they have done the service to readers of putting the battle in the book so that we've got a comprehensive view of what's going on in the theater. And I just think that was a really great service to readers to be able to kind of fill that kind of stuff in. Elsewhere in the book, at the bottom of the page, it might say, to date, we've saved 345 acres or such, like here, 520 acres at Aversboro. And that's highlighted on the map so that people can see, I've donated money to this battlefield. Here's how the trust has been a good steward of that money. And they've highlighted things. I can go and walk the land and see it. So there's just a lot of neat features about the book that really highlight that preservation mission that underscores kind of why these books exist in the first place.
And Steve does a great job. If you look down in our legends, and read a legend of a map. I think that people don't often do that enough. Look at the legend. You can see all the preservation groups that have worked to help preserve here at Aversboro. Bentonville's the same way. Shiloh. Sometimes it's just us. Sometimes it's a whole, coming together of different groups to try to work and save these lands, because we can't do it without our partners, especially local partners on the ground. And to pull back the curtain for a moment for Fort Fisher, that's totally an author slash editor purview. I like the battle, so I wanted to write about the battle. So that's why the map's there and why we wrote about it. Is it integral to the story of the Western Theater? Yes, because I said it was.
Yeah.
That was an enjoyable one to work on too. I mean, trying to come up with showing the where the land is now compared to what it was back then. It was fun to work with.
This map, I think, also illustrates a really key point of why land preservation is so important in the first place, and then how kind of having the battlefield and a map in conjunction with each other lets one illuminate the other. If we look at Fort Fisher and kind of look over where Adelbert Ames makes his assault, sort of right down the middle of the map, and you could look at the map and be like, oh, look, that was so easy. But if you actually go walk the ground and see what a miserable marsh that was that they had to cross and how they're storming the gates of the fort, being on the ground lets you understand just how difficult these swooping arrows really were in real time, which is something that you can't appreciate. But if you're on the ground and you're sort of trying to puzzle that out, having that map then makes it go like, oh, wow, this makes sense. So they're tools that work in strong conjunction with each other for understanding what's going on in any place.
Yeah, and as Steve said, and you said, Kris, our maps are online at battlefields.org. I do a lot of text on our website for them. We do have sometimes more maps than you actually would see in this book. And what we try to do is update them. As Steve updates them, we try to update them on the website, and that's the best approach to it. And it's not only for the historical standpoint, but again, it's for the preservation standpoint, because those maps are most likely updated, not always because of history, but most likely because we preserved land at a place, and we have to account for that and show our members, how we're spending their money.
So you guys a couple times have alluded to the next book. Are you guys able to share any details this time? Is it top secret?
Oh, it's not top secret. It's coming soon, but we just got the cover back 2 days ago now, and it'll be the battle maps of the American Revolution. So Steve is diligently working on about 70 odd maps for this book. He sent us about 38 maps the other day, which are reviewed by historians. This isn't just something we do internally. It's not just something I do. We talk to the experts about these battles, the battlefields. We send them out to many people. I sent Steve, an 8-page report from a few historians who went through these, and Steve will look at the changes that they suggested. Sometimes they make suggestions, sometimes they don't. But we will be covering the entire story of the American Revolution from Lexington and Concord through Yorktown, and hitting the high notes and low points. Lots of low points during the American Revolution for the Americans. But again, this will be another book where we include battlefields that we have not preserved land. The cover that you're seeing here is Saratoga. This is in upstate New York. We have preserved land there. And the map that's at the bottom that is on the front here is a section of one of Steve's maps that is showing the Battle of Brandywine, which is just south of Philadelphia. And it is a stunning British success, not a American success. That's actually during the Philadelphia campaign. The nation's capital for the first time will fall to a foreign enemy, and both times it'll be Great Britain. But they will take Philadelphia there in 1777. Not a good year for the Americans. And Brandywine is another place where we preserved a significant amount of land. Yorktown, down at the Southern campaigns, and places like Cowpens, Camden, Kings Mountain will include those battlefields. So you'll see a lot of places you've heard of, some places you may not have heard of. And Steve, like I said, is working diligently on the maps.
Very good. That's exciting. So you said there may be more down the road. If you guys each had the chance to, what's one map you hope that you get to work on someday that you haven't so far, what might that map be?
I know that's hard to think. Go, Kris.
I was going to say probably a Banks's Ford map a good Banks's Ford map for the Chancellorsville / Salem Church / Banks Ford campaign there. We have a decent map for our book, but I want to like the map for it.
Yeah, it's for myself. I'm not really sure if there's any one particular one, I want to see map, because normally mine is like we've done quite a few. I mean, a lot of maps. My thing is I like to make them more detailed if possible. But if I can break that map out into more time, instead of one map have 5 or 6 maps of that battle, you get more minute details in there as they're really moving. But our new one coming out was American Revolution. I had like I think 1 or 2 maps for Battle Monmouth Courthouse in New Jersey. Now I broke it into at least 4, because 4 phases, and it's I have more detail in those 4 phases than having it as one map. So that's what I really personally like to do, have more detail on a map itself.
That's what I love about your troop movement maps in Spotsylvania, and you can almost kind of flip through them like a flip book and see motion over the course of days. And that lets you get so much more detail and so much more minute in what you're up to there.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that we can't pull back the curtain a little bit, we can't always go into the detail, because me, I'm a total detail guy when it comes to battlefields. It is simply the mailing cost of it, printing and mailing cost. That's something that we have to take into consideration every time we do an appeal. How many maps should we produce? And then X amount will have to be printed, and then they'll have to be mailed. So the more that we add to it, that's more overhead that is not going back to preserving the battlefields. In the long run, these maps are bread and butter. They help people visualize, they can see where the troops were and everything. But that's one thing that these books, I agree with Steve, have been great about. We've been able to get into some more minute detail, especially about the Revolutionary War, which, I mean, you're talking about much smaller battle scales, but really cool troop movements.
Steve, I'll ask you real quick, since you talked about a map you might want to do. Is there a map that you hope you never have to see again?
No, not really. I mean, all of them I do enjoy working on. I do enjoy working on all of them. Some were a little more challenging than others, but overall, no, I think I would work on any of them again.
Very good. So if someone wants to get a hold of battle maps of the Civil War, either the Eastern or the Western theater, Kris, how can people get these books?
So both books are available at battlefields.org. You can come over to our website and click on our store. Battle Maps Volume 1 is available on Amazon. Volume 2 will be going to Amazon any day now, so they can head over to amazon.com. But battlefields.org, you can come over, you can buy all kinds of fun swag. I'm still trying to get the Gary Edelman 8x10 signed glossy headshots on there. I think those would be the best sellers in the store, but he hasn't gone down that road yet. I also think we should get the Gary stand-ups too.
Yeah, like the cardboard cutout. And oh yeah.
Totally. I think we should have those.
Yeah.
It needs the 3D glasses on there too.
Yeah. Those are sold separately.
I think to get like a standstill thing of Gary though is so anti-Gary, since he's always in motion. That would be, you'd have to get something that was just a blur.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we do have over at battlefields.org. And then, this our map book is set to, our next one, Volume 3, is set to come out in June of 2021. And like I said, Steve will actually be at our annual conference speaking about the production of our maps that we have. I say ours because, a bunch of people go into them, but they really are Steve's maps. I mean, and if it wasn't for Steve, we wouldn't be known to so many people. And I think he does just a fantastic job. And Steve, I have to say, is a fantastic cartographer to work with, because Steve is like, all right, we'll change it. Like, hey, we send him something like, hey, this was wrong, because we do get feedback, like Steve said, and Steve's always very gracious in taking the, hey, we got this wrong, on this map, and with the book itself too, it's like, oh, here's the updated text. Oh, here I tweaked the text again. Oh, I tweaked it for a third time, and he's always like, all right, I'll take care of it. So it's been very nice to have someone who's really chill to work with, unlike Chris Mackowski.
That's right.
So as Kris alluded, we do get changes back and everything from comments back from our members and all. Sometimes they are correct, we did miss something. Sometimes they aren't. I mean, I've, just a case in point, one particular battle, someone said, "Oh, my, relative's regiment was there in the battle, but you didn't have one there." So I pulled up the stuff and found out that the day of the battle, that regiment was guarding wagons. They weren't in the battle. Even though they might have been in that brigade, they weren't, they weren't in the battle. So sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong.
Yeah, and we've had people who said that they fought at the battle and the unit's not even in that theater. We did have that one recently too. That was a good one that we had. But and we do have gremlins in the book. I know with every once in a while we it's like, how it happens. You edit the book 30 times and then it comes in print, and as soon as you open the first page, it's like, oh look, I screwed that up.
Yep.
So every once in a while, if we go through our next printing for volume 1, there's definitely a map that we'll just need to swap out. And it's minor, probably most people wouldn't notice it, but on the Antietam map, we have to change one thing. So it's, and if you do have suggestions, be kind. You don't need to be snarky. It's
Everyone's trying their hardest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's we're all on the same team here. We want to get it right.
Yeah. And then I guess that's kind of one of the cool things about, the maps being living organisms in some way, is like we make those changes and slap them up on the website so people can still get the most up-to-date thing if they're really dying for it. So
yeah, that's what makes the trust unique, I think, because when we print books, yes, it's going to be static. That's the way we have to live with it. But a lot of our maps, the ones that especially didn't make it into the books, yeah, if something's wrong, we can change it, and as fast as the internet uploads it, it's correct.
Well, Steve, and I'll just end with the I think what is the best testament. It's on the back cover of the books. I just love those maps you guys send me. And I know people say that over and over. People are just crazy about these maps. And it's so nice to see them collected in such a beautiful book. A great testament to the service that you have provided to the Civil War community. I really think it's fantastic.
Well, thank you, Chris, for that. That was, it's been my pleasure to work on these maps. It's been my pleasure to talk to you on this as well.
So great. Well, Steve, thanks for joining me today. Chris, thanks for joining me today. Everyone, check these out, battlefields.org. You can see Steve's great maps, Chris's great text, and the great work that the American Battlefield Trust is doing to preserve your battlefields. And I'm Chris Mackowski. We will see you online and on the battlefield.